Thank you, Elise, and it's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker this afternoon. Dr. Timothy Shriver is the chairman of the board of Special Olympics International. I've known Tim for almost 2 decades, from the time the Special Olympics World Games were held in New Haven, Connecticut, and I had the honor of working as the research director for those games. We had a fun and very productive time, and I was later a member of Tim's dissertation thesis committee, where he successfully studied attitudes towards disabilities in school-age children. Since that time, Tim has really taken on his life's work and his life's passion. As director of the Special Olympics movement, he has both embodied and gone beyond his formal graduate training and his deep family roots in service and leadership in disabilities. Tim's visions for Special Olympics International are far-ranging. He has led the Special Olympics global movement so that it now encompasses close to 3 million athletes and 1.3 million coaches and volunteers across 182 countries. Under Tim's leadership, Special Olympics International has become the largest volunteer organization in the world. Beyond these numbers, however, Tim has also led his organization to develop many novel programs. These programs promote positive attitudes towards persons with disabilities, train athlete leaders, help build inclusive international public policies, foster family support networks, and as we talked about this morning, promote athlete health and wellness through intensive public health screenings. Tim is exactly the right person to help us celebrate our community partnerships at the Vanderbilt Kennedy Center. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Timothy Shriver. You are so welcome.
Well, that's fine. Oh, okay. Thank you. Well, Elizabeth gave it away. I thought I wasn't supposed to let on that she was on my dissertation review committee. But not that anybody here necessarily wants me to do anything, but you now know that if you ever did want me to do anything, you just ask Elizabeth to ask me. It's a pretty automatic yes. Anyway, I want to thank Elizabeth and Bob and everybody here, Pat, for a wonderful morning here on the campus of this great university, a chance to meet earlier today with folks from the medical school and to then go down and get a sense of the history of this place and its extraordinary leadership. I want to thank Nick. I don't have to call you Chancellor, I guess, but I want to thank Nick for being here today and for being here about these community partners. I think it says as much about this university as any other single gesture that when the partners come, when the people who are doing the work in the community come, the Chancellor comes. And I think it's a wonderful statement of the faculty, to the research teams here, but mostly to the community partners to know that at the highest levels of leadership at the university, the recognition for the work being done is there, and your comments today were just terrific, and I'm very grateful. I also want to, in a special way, thank some of the friends here from Nashville, friends I actually just met today for the first time. Pam Inman, who I met 10 years ago. This is a funny story about a meeting. I was interested in that time in ensuring that all of our Special Olympics programs would have athletes on their boards of directors. So we spent some time within our movement, deciding whether this was going to be a policy or not, and we ended up deciding it would be a policy. And I believe, if not the first, one of the second or third athletes to join a board was Pam. So this was also 97 or 8 maybe, so the internet was relatively new. So I was encouraging as many athletes as possible to get email accounts. So I wrote her an email to congratulate her on being named to the Board of Directors of Special Olympics Tennessee, and she went and told her mother that there was a stalker writing her. So, you sit in Washington sometimes and you think you know what's going on, but over the last 10 years, Pam and I have become wonderful email friends, and just met for the first time today face-to-face. So it's great to add a face to a long relationship. And I don't want to tell you, but I get almost every score of almost every Vanderbilt sport, almost every team, men's and women's, through Pam. So I'm sort of a Commodore in, I don't know, some derivative way, I guess. Alan Bolick, who leads our team here in Tennessee, thank you for coming out this morning and for spending so much time with us today. You all should be very proud of the Special Olympics program that is here in the state of Tennessee. It's one of our leaders in this country, growing, adding more athletes. We always talk about not being content in this movement, never being content. To stay where you are is to move backwards. And this is a state program that has tried to be out in front on issues around inclusion and unified sports, reaching hard-to-reach athletes, reaching those who are economically or socially marginalized, trying to make a difference in the toughest situations. So I'm very grateful to Alan and the board for being so ahead of so many issues here in the state. We had a great time with Vince Durnan at the next door at school, and it was a real honor for me to hear about a private school with a public mission. So I just want you to know that even in a short time today, from the medical school to a private school to a clinical setting to talking about research patterns in the field of intellectual disability to being here with these community partners to hearing about the research in genetics and so on over lunch, I've gotten such a full sense of the potential, not just of a university, but a university, a community, a network group of inquiring people who want to make a difference, and very proud to be here. And in a special way, I also want to recognize and thank my colleague Darcy Mercereau, who came down with me and does so much of our work and research around the world and does just a fantastic job. I wanted to take, the slides that were up here before were like a family album. And it was wonderful to see, my grandmother has been here and my father was in some of those slides. And I'm frequently, well, which one are you? Are you... are you related to this one that way or that one this way? And so my mother was, of course, up there. And I don't mind, people go, well, which one are you? That's fine. I'm 48 years old, and I'm kind of getting used to it. It's just when they say, are you Arnold Schwarzenegger's brother-in-law? That's a little bit of a tooth grind, But anyway, I wanted to spend just a few minutes today trying to help us, in a way, think differently. And I don't want to make this academic because it's not my field, but I do want to challenge us to think a little bit differently about the work we're doing and invite some kinds of discussions, I hope, both within the community partners and within the university teams about where the field of disability is going. Because in some ways, I think, the progress is obvious. And the changes are incredible, and the lifespan and so on is fantastic. But in some ways, we still have some pretty significant challenges. And some of those challenges are much more painful and much more serious and much more urgent than many people think they are. Many people talk about Special Olympics, say, oh, it's so nice. It's such a nice thing you're doing. Well, I don't particularly like that word, and I don't like it because it doesn't communicate to me any of the urgency I feel. When I talk to mothers and fathers, when I talk to people with special needs, when I talk to people in communities who have suffered through the rejection, the isolation, the lack of service, the absolute criminal neglect, it doesn't feel like it should be about being nice. It should be about important, urgent work to resolve social injustices, to attack the discrimination that still exists out there, and most importantly, to celebrate giftedness in a way that doesn't allow for any discrimination or bias or stigma to creep into our national, our local, our family, our community dialogues. So let me start, if I can make this work. There we go. This is one of my favorite moments in Special Olympics history. It was Elizabeth was probably there somewhere, having just completed a fantastic study, and I don't know if she had Bob yet. Did she have you yet in 1995 yet? Sort of. A little bit. It's kind of hooking and moving back and forth. But anyway, Bob and Elizabeth maybe were there somewhere in this great crowd. This was the opening ceremonies of the World Summer Games in 1995. And this was the first time we ever had a president of the United States come and attend. Bill Clinton came in. He came in by chopper. And you can see actually on the Jumbotron, when this photograph was taken, he was speaking. But he was speaking on about the second row from the top of the Yale Bowl. And for those of you that know this stadium, it's never used, never full, and really in bad shape. But that notwithstanding, we filled it up for the opening ceremonies. But for security reasons, since they really couldn't control access, they kept him 2 rows from the top. So you had all these athletes down on the field, and he wasn't allowed to go down. But one of our photographers was down the field, and all the athletes were given single-use cameras by one of our sponsors then. And I don't like to say the sponsor because they dropped us after the event. But they were yellow cameras. Bad company. No, I'm just kidding. Anyway, so we have a professional photographer who's taking pictures, and he sees a group of athletes from an African nation. He doesn't know which one. And there are about 8 or 10 of these athletes, and they're all trying to get a picture of the president, who's way up at the top. And he takes a closer look, and he sees they've all got their cameras up, trying to get a picture, and they're all backwards. And then the lens is on the nose. And he says, my God, these people have never had to use a camera before. So he walks over, and he doesn't know if they speak English, and he says, you're trying to get a picture of the president. And the athlete sort of looks kind of questioningly at he says, you've just got to turn the camera around, and then you'll get a good shot of the president. And the athlete says, oh, thank you. He says, but if you look through the viewfinder backwards, it works like binoculars, and you can see the president very well. Now, I like that story because it frames expectations and changes in expectations. It frames the challenge I think we face in a unique way now, that this photographer, good guy, right? I mean, he's out there, he's volunteering his time, he's trying to make a difference, he's capturing the wonderful stories, the nice stories of Special Olympics. His assumption, through no fault of his own, is about incompetence. There must be some deficit. After all, these are people with special needs, so therefore they need my help. They need some support. They need to be told. They need to be helped. They are in a deficit position. I am in a competent position. This is not malice I'm attributing to him. It's just assumption. Who was the most changed person on that field that day? Who changed the most? Was it the athlete who got a chance to come all this great distance? Well, certainly. What an experience to come from Africa, to be on the field with people from all over the world, to rejoice in this moment of celebration of his or her. But that photographer changed just as much, in my view. And it is that photographer's change, in my view, in my way of thinking of it, that we need to think a lot about now as community partners and as scholars. Because for whatever the progress of the last several years has been, and it has been substantial. We focused on inclusion and social justice and services and supports, the sweeping changes in education legislation over the last 30 years, dramatic differences, right? Housing legislation, support from the ADA, IDEA, all these laws have been about saying we have people who have special needs and we want equality of supports and services to help them. But, as this last point tries to say, this is about social justice and need. It's not so much about value. It's not about surprising value. It's about need. So the photographer looks and he thinks these people need help. He's not thinking these are people who have extraordinary skills, who have figured out how to use a single-use camera and turn it into binoculars, right? That's not where he was. And so there's risks, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these risks, but when you look at some of the data, 60% of Americans today don't think a child with special needs should be in their child's school. Not 1903, not 1953, not 1973, not before ADA, not before IDEA, not before 94-142, not before all that stuff, after all that. Most Americans see the presence of a child with special needs as a risk to their child, not as an asset. And the stories go on. I won't take you through all these, but the care of this population around the world is simply criminal, and it's allowed to go on. And do we have a major foreign policy about it? Does USAID do much about it? Does the UN do much about it? Does the World Bank do much about it? No, across the board. If you go knocking on the doors, as we do in our movement, and say, we've got a program to help people with special needs in Serbia or in Romania or in other parts of the world, and we say, where's the person who funds this kind of work that can get the community engaged, that can promote health? There isn't anybody in any of these institutions, I'm sorry to say. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. This is just a recent study that we did about the reporting systems This comes back to legal issues, Chancellor. When you look at countries and you ask them, what do you know about people with special needs? They don't know almost anything. They don't even capture the data. Now, these looks technical. The right-hand column is the number of systems within countries that chart the status of people with disabilities. Now, if you take the general population, the number is all 100. So you can imagine a third column that says tracking household demographics for the population. That's tracked for everybody. When you get to disabilities, 75% or so systems capture information on disabilities. When you get to developmental disability or intellectual disability, the data starts to disappear. And so if you ask people, what's the healthcare system doing for people with special needs in Romania, they'll say, well, we don't know. And if you don't know, then you don't solve the problem, because you have no problem identified, you have no solution identified, you have no gap between what's ideal and what's real, and so you don't do anything. And most of these places where you go, the mentality is still, that's a liability, we don't have time for that, we haven't gotten to it yet. This is a recent study that just came out in a peer-reviewed journal about 2 months ago. In this country, again, 40% of mothers of children with Down syndrome report feeling isolated. Why? Because they are asked, they feel explicitly, why they had their kids. Now, not to get into debates about these issues, it's not about genetic testing or any of that. The issue is that the reason they're asked is because there's a perception that their child is a liability. Sorry, I'm sorry you have this child. Why did you bother going through it? This is a thing we just worked together with our team in Oklahoma on just last year. This woman to the right, Misty Cargill, was denied being allowed to be placed on a transplant list. Because the transplant surgeons, which is a very complicated process, and I know very little about it, but we looked into it and found out that they basically excluded her because of what they classified as mental incompetence or a lack of mental competence. Now, Misty Cargill works a full-time job, lives independently, has a boyfriend, bowls recreationally, competes in Special Olympics, follows the rules much better than most people, would be a fantastic patient in the complex world of transplants because she would be rigorous about what she does. But there's a perception that in the tough world of transplant calculations, you got a normal person here and a person who has some limitation or liability down further. Now, here's the point. Our movement is about trying to make the statement that all of you make every day with your lives. And we try to make it in any audience we can find, which is this person's not a liability. This person's not a problem. This person may have special challenges. How many people in the room don't? Raise your hand. Okay? How many people in the room don't have weaknesses, don't have vulnerabilities, don't have hidden pain, don't struggle with some demons, don't have some area where you feel weak, don't have some limitation in your work life that you feel hinders you from being as good as you ought to be? How many people don't have that? And yet, we would be hard-pressed to say that there isn't 100 gifts for every person in this room. Every one of you could turn to the person next to you and say, you have hundreds of gifts. Look at all the strengths you have. But we don't talk strengths in this field as much as we ought to, in my view. We don't talk giftedness in this field as much as we ought to. We don't talk about the absolute benefit of being a friend, a colleague, a brother, a sister, a mother, a dad, a workmate, a teammate of a person with a special need. We talk about adapting to them, not about making the world a place where their gifts are celebrated, in my view. So I think this is a challenge for us. Our work is to try to make this movement not about them, not about any them. There's no them. Look at this room. Who's them? Who's the beneficiary in this room? Every one of us. This movement that we're trying to build is not about them, it's about all of us. Everybody has a gift. Everybody has a need. We all come together to celebrate both. It's not just about events, it's about a movement. A movement is a way of thinking, Not just something you go to, not just something you attended. It's a way you believe. The women's movement, the civil rights movement. Yeah, you could say the civil rights movement had a defining point at the bridge, but that wasn't the movement. The movement was a way of thinking that changed the country's way of thinking. And it didn't just change the world for African Americans, it changed the world for everybody. That's what we're trying to build in our work through Special Olympics. Not just sports, although sports is the core of everything we do, but sports as a way of reflecting value and dignity. Sports to change the world. There are so many stories, I don't want to bore you with them all, and I know people probably have to go, but I have about 400 slides here. I could go through it. But I get going on this stuff, and I think it's important, and I hope I'm communicating some of my passion. This is a story of a unified pair of teammates in basketball from Slovakia. Special school 4 blocks outside of the city. Regular school in the city. Every morning, a group of mothers told us, the kids walking down to the special school would have to cross the street and be made fun of as they walked down the street and be called names by the regular kids. Every morning, it was a ritual. Unified sports person goes in, and for the first time, the kids from the regular school go down to the special school, cross through that terrifying boundary, cross into the place that they'd been calling names to all these years. And now you have teammates. And I'm imagining myself the mother of that child with special needs. I won't ask a vote for which person you think has special needs. But imagine the mother who found her child walking out every morning to be called names and then having that stop. And then imagine the mother whose son was going out every morning and calling someone names. I don't, for one, believe that either mother benefited the more. If we talked about this story, we would typically say, isn't it wonderful that a child with special needs is no longer called names? I think to myself, what a gift to the other mother, that her child is no longer afraid, no longer a bully, no longer a name caller, no longer pushing people away from him out of fear. What a gift that he's now a teammate, that he understands that crossing a barrier of difference, that being accepted by someone who he scorned, that being welcomed by that person who was cast out was a gift given to him, a gift of value. That's a good one, huh? This is a similar story. I won't go into all the details. Private, white school, elite school in South Africa. Special needs school, all African, all black, not 15 minutes away by car. No communication. But if you look at these pictures, I don't want to ask you to guess who you think are the better basketball players, right? So these are boundary crossing situations where in a place torn to pieces, almost rent off the map by racial fear and hatred and prejudice and bias, institutionalized, all the way down to the letter of the law in that country. Where are the boundaries being crossed? They're being crossed by people with special needs who are still open, still welcoming, still ready to play. These are gifts that you don't find in every population. Now, I'm not saying our population is of just one type. They're not all the same. But these gifts, these possibilities of crossing these boundaries are extraordinary in my view. I think of my own son. My son plays on a unified team. And I was driving home one day with him, and I said to him, after we had Saturday morning practice, it was the middle of winter, it was cold, I said to him, Sam, you really enjoying this unified team? He says, yeah, I'm enjoying it, it's fine. I was like, no, really? He says, yeah, it was fine, Dad, it's fine, no problem. I said, no, you're probably just doing this for me, aren't you? I mean, I'm starting to feel guilty, it's, you're not playing with his friends and all this kind of stuff. I said, seriously? He said, Dad, it's fine, I like it. So I turn off the radio. He's like, what are you doing? Like an 11-year-old kid. What are you doing? I said, I'm asking you a question. I want to know your answer. What do you think of this? And he turns to me, and I'll never forget this. He says, look, Dad, let me explain to you this way. If you told me we were going to Disney World this weekend, I would say that's the most fun you can have. It would be the best experience. We'd be on rides, we'd have a great time, everything would be fantastic. He says, but the problem is then it's over. And that sucks. And then you wish you didn't even go. He says, so let me put it this way. That Special Olympics, it's like the fun that lasts. And then he says, turn on the radio. Now, again, the point is not to brag about my son. The point is to brag about the gift he was given. Imagine at 11 years old understanding the difference between those two kinds of fun. I mean, I hadn't really ever thought of it quite that way. As you can have fun on a roller coaster, but you can have a different kind of fun when you overcome a difference, when you are of service, when you make a difference for someone else, when someone else allows you the honor of helping them or of, in return, being helped. This is I don't have time, I know you all have to go, but this is a wonderful story of our program and a peace games training camp we did in the Middle East. In that picture, there are Palestinians, there are Israelis, there are Jordanians. This was the first day that it wasn't Palestinian against Israeli, that the coaches agreed on the second day of the camp to put the athletes on mixed teams. And shortly after this photograph was taken, the first goal was scored. Everybody knows what happens after you score a goal in soccer, right? Everybody runs and hugs, right? Well, when you're on a team and you're Israeli and you're Palestinian and you're Jordanian, you don't hug, except in this situation. And when that first goal was scored and the Palestinian athlete was hugged by the Israeli athlete and both coaches were crying on the sidelines, and the one turned to me saying, I never thought in my life I would see something like this, looking at that embrace, that simplicity, that openness, that capacity to overcome. This is not a deficit. This is not a weakness. This is not about learning how to boil an egg. All those skills are important, and I know everybody commits their lives to them, but we have to remember that it's not just about helping someone do the basics, that there are extraordinary gifts in this population that are valuable to us as families, to communities, to religious institutions, to schools, and to countries. So I'm going to skip some of this stuff because I know I'm out of time, but I want to just read you one story, because there is a research agenda here, and this is the kind of research agenda where community partners, I believe, can matter. This is from a story, a study of Latino mothers and their struggles with children with disability, and this is one of what the qualitative researchers called a quest narrative. I'm just going to read. It's a little bit long, but bear with me. This is one mom describing her experience. You know, that day I realized that he was going to be blind, I cried. I threw myself to the floor and I said to God, my God, take him. He's still in the hospital, so we haven't formed that bond as if he'd been home for 4 months or something like that. Take him, because as he is, I don't want him. And now I eat those words. After having him, everything changed. I became a divorced mother, child with problems, no money, no work, no car, no home, needing financial and emotional support from my family and my friends. Another person couldn't have made it. But I didn't let myself fall. I sometimes think, my God, where did I get so much strength? How did I do that? But at that moment, I was doing it because he gives you such strength, confidence, something so grand you can't explain it, something so big you don't even feel the sorrow in that moment. It's a blessing to be able to have him, a blessing that changed my life, a blessing that we have learned what we have, that we become more sensitive and more compassionate people. Now, this is not a saccharine story. This is not a story of some simple job of being a mom. It's not all easy. But this is a story of a woman who has gone through a narrative of her own and found a strength from her child, from the challenge. Yeah, it's a challenge, but a strength from that challenge that most people don't get. And many people have a struggle with it. Again, I'm not trying to make it sound easy, but I do believe that if we start to inquire into the lives of mothers and fathers, people with special needs, their brothers and their sisters, we start to inquire not just into the supports, the external factors that lead to them having productive lives, but the internal states within family members, within people with special needs. When we start to inquire into the outcomes of the struggles that come from special needs situations, we will start to find reservoirs of insight about purpose, about meaning, about value, Some of these things are coming out in a very limited number of studies that are out there. People learning to speak out, people becoming more compassionate, networking and meeting other friends, seeing life from a different perspective, becoming stronger. These are some of the ways in which parents report the benefits. Family members in this study report a range of positive perceptions and experiences, purpose, sense of meaning in life. Now, here's just a quick shot of how we're trying to capture this. And again, I'll go very fast. This is a mock-up of an ad campaign. And when you look at this, think about this difference between talking about people with special needs as needing supports versus talking about people with special needs as assets, as people of value. So this is what we're shooting for. So this would be an ad. So you'd see, be a fan of sports, be a fan of unity, be a fan of tolerance, empowerment, and dignity. Be a fan of courage and of grace. Be a fan of acceptance, courtesy, and kindness. Be a fan of togetherness. Be a fan of joy. Be a fan of strength. Be a fan of generosity and of inclusion. And this one's important, be a fan of fun. Be a fan of inspiration and of the ones who inspire you. Be a fan of competition, of winning, of being brave in the attempt. Be a fan of trying your best. Be a fan of what's unique in each and every one of us. Be a fan of the human race. So, sorry, yeah, beautiful, huh? The point there is there are gifts. And we have a lot of role models. This is the new website, which we hope young people, people with special needs and non-disabled people, I hope Matthew Drumright's photographs will be all over this website when we put it up on the internet. I hope people will come and tell their stories at all ages about courage, about fun, about inspiration, about the people that inspire them. Think about those values as places where people can network at all ages. High school kids, college kids, elementary school kids can tell their stories. But we need more social science research. We need to think about the positive psychology message that Elizabeth and Bob and so many people here have helped us to learn from. I guess I'll quote Elizabeth. I have to because she's my role model and been so much to me. But she closes her very important article on a positive psychology of mental retardation and saying, unlike even a decade ago, we can now well afford to move away from the historical emphasis on external life conditions in people with mental retardation. And although the quality of life and dual diagnosis and motivation and family movements have focused on the external or pathological, each displays glimmerings of things positive that now need to be expanded into a full-blown science of well-being. That's the challenge of community partners, of families, of scholars, of medical leaders, of law, of multidisciplinary approach. This has not been done in any university across these disciplines with this kind of a focus anywhere in the world. We have role models, ladies and gentlemen. You know, it sounds complicated. It's way above my capabilities. I've barely scratched through my PhD. But we have role models. This picture was taken outside of Robben Island, and the background, that reddish stone in the upper right-hand corner, is the panel underneath the bars of the prison cell where Nelson Mandela spent 27 years. And the guy on the left is Ricardo Thornton, person with special needs who was incarcerated in an institution in the United States for the first 17 years of his life. And they went back to Robben Island to launch a growth campaign for our movement in South Africa together, both wrongly imprisoned, right? Both wrongly stigmatized, and Mandela talking not about, as he says so beautifully, freedom is not unlocking your own chains, but it's unlocking the chains of others, the chains of hate and discrimination and bias that others have. So our job is not just to provide the services, but to be followers of, and I'm going to close with this speech that's just extraordinary for me. And Troy Daniels came to our national games on the right. He's a Special Olympics athlete from Vermont. He was asked when he graduated from high school to be the valedictory speaker. And I know many of you study speeches probably, and there's great ones that are 2 minutes in length. This is his valedictory speech. at Northfield High School in Vermont. I'm not going to even read the whole thing. It's a minute long. It's one of the best speeches I've ever read in my life, and you can include Lincoln and Martin Luther King and everybody else on top of it. He starts out, "My name is Troy Daniels, but my friends call me TD. I have Down syndrome. I'm a person with disabilities. When I say my friends, I mean friends, real friends, just like everyone else. I have friends. Not too long ago, people with disabilities could not go to school with other kids. They had to go to special schools. They could not have real friends. They call people like me retard. That breaks my heart. When I came to school, there's a law that says all kids go to school in the place where they live. I started school right here in Northfield with all the senior class. We were little kids together. The law says that I can come to school, but no law can make me have friends. But then some kids started to think that I was okay. First, it was just one or two kids who were nice to me. They found out that I cared about them and I loved my school. We started to learn together that in some ways we were different, but in some ways we were the same. They called me friend and made sure that I was in everything at school. I cared about them. They cared about me. I want all people to know and to see that these students I call my friends are the real teachers in life. They're showing you how it should be. They are the teachers for all of you to follow their lead. Yes, I'm a person with disability. The law says I'm included, but it's my friends who say, TD, come sit by me. TD, come sit by me. We have a challenge as partners. I want to just congratulate all of you for the work you do every day. I know it's not easy. I want to thank all of those folks who have volunteered for Special Olympics and Best Buddies and some of the programs that me and my family have worked on. I want to thank this university for multiple generations of support for this work. My mother said, make sure to say that the women did all the hard work when I came down there. Susan Gray gets all the credit. Don't give it to the boys, give it to the girls. But all in all, we stand here really at the center of a place that's been at the center of the best thinking in this field for generations. And we have a chancellor and community partners and scholars who are first in class globally. And I just hope that the energy, the possibility of rededicating ourselves to the next generation of excellence in this work will not be lost on us and that we can play a role. Thank you very much. Thank you.